project here, right click, go to new Java project. You can name it anything, but I'm just going to call it learn JDBC and just hit finish. And inside of here in the source folder, I'm going to create a class. I'm going to right click and go to new class, and we're going to name this class JDBC demo, and this is going to contain the main method. So hit finish, and now in here we're going to provide all of the configuration details to not only connect with our database, but also interact with it by sending SQL commands to the database. So we covered some basic SQL commands in the previous lecture. So if you need a quick review, you can just take a look at the last 5 or 10 minutes of that lecture. But I'm going to go over those real quick here as we code along. Now, the first thing we need to connect to the database is, of course, a connection, right? And that calls for creating a connection object. So I'm going to define a variable of type connection, and I'm just going to call it conn. And notice it doesn't recognize this type. Hover your mouse here, and it wants us to import one of these. The one you want to import is this java.sql, the one that comes from this package. So click that, and this is the object called connection, and we're going to assign this connection object the value that comes from something called driver manager.getConnection. Right there. And notice that it was able to bring in the driver manager from the same package, java.sql. And this is the object. So we use this object to get a connection object. And as an argument to it, we need to provide a couple of things. The first thing is we need a database URL. So whether your database is on this machine or on some remote server somewhere, that database is going to have some kind of URL. And this varies depending on the vendor of the database. So for MySQL, I'm going to provide the URL string right here. So let's first define a variable. We'll call it URL, and it's going to be of type string. And we are going to give the URL in this string. And that goes something like this. We type in JDBC : and then we type in the name of the database, which is MySQL. And then we have to provide the server address, and this could be an IP address or the URL of the server, followed by the port number. On the SQL workbench, let me load that up here. This is the guy that we connected, right? And we clicked on this and it was able to bring us to the database. Notice that the user is root, and the IP address here is going to be the local IP address, which is 127.0.0.1, because this database is running on our machine, and the port number 3306. So we just basically have to type this in the URL string, and that's going to be 127.0.0.1, and then we do a : 3306. That's the port number on which this database is running. And then following that, we put a slash, and now we need to give the database. Now we've already created that database. We can shut the database down and start it up. That database is going to be there, right? We didn't delete it or anything. We created it in the previous lecture. And that database was called employees_database. And that's your URL string that you pass to this driver manager. It's getConnection method. Now, if you click on this getConnection, let's control click it. It takes a URL. That's one of the methods, but there's an overloaded version of this method that accepts the user name and the password for the database. And that's up here. Notice it's getConnection. It requires a URL, and then we have to also give the username and password. So we're going to use this method right here. So I'm just going to put a comma and then provide the username, which was root, and the password that we had set up. So I just kept it simple and gave the password of password123, and I recommend while you're practicing, leave it simple so that you don't forget. And now this red line underneath is actually, you could probably guess what it's asking us to do. Hover your mouse, and it's saying we need to handle this SQL exception. If there's a problem connecting to the database, we'd like it to handle the exception gracefully. So we could either throw that exception or we could surround it with a try catch. So let's just click on the second option. It surrounds this connection statement with a try. Now after this connection object that's established here on this line, we need to create another kind of object, and that's going to be the statement. So right here, let me just put comments, establish connection object. Okay? That's what this line is supposed to do. After that, we need to create a SQL statement. So create a statement object to send to the database. Okay, that's what we do here. And the way to do that is we use this statement object, and we'll just call it statement with a lowercase. That's the variable. So this is the actual class. Hover your mouse on this, and notice it's asking us to do the import. We want to import from the java.sql package. So let's just click that, and notice it brought in that statement class into this code. So the variable statement of type statement, and I'm going to assign it a statement object. And you get that from the connection object that we established up there, and we do conn dot create statement. Okay, and this is our statement object now. So to send the query to the database, we have to execute the statement. So that's what we're going to do here next. Execute the statement object. And we can't just execute it the way we have it here. This is just a blank statement. So we need to populate it with a particular query or some kind of an operation to tell the database what to do. So for that, we could do statement dot execute, and there's an option for query. So we're going to query the database for some data, and we provide that SQL statement in here, all right, in these quotes. And we looked at a few examples of basic SQL statements in the previous lecture. So I'm just going to do select star. So that's going to give us all the columns. Select all the columns from the employees table. Remember the table name? It was employees underscore TBL. And we don't need a semicolon inside of these quotes. We could just leave it the way it is here. Now this is going to return something. It's going to return the actual data. So, we could store that information into something called a result set object. So I'm just going to define something called result set, and that's going to be assigned to this guy. And the data type for this variable is going to be a result set object. So let me define that here. Result set. Okay, so we need to import this library as well. So hover your mouse, and it's giving us the option to import the result set from the java.sql package. So let's click that, and there we go. That brings up the result set. So this is going to contain the data from the database. Now what's left to do is just, we could say, process the result. And that could be as simple as executing a while loop and printing the data. So let's just create that. I'm going to do while result set dot next, right? This is a special method to move on to the next set of records. This is going to go one by one, record by record, iterating through the result set. And I could print out the result set dot get string. And we provide the column name for the column that contains the string data. So that column name, we could choose, department column. We have the name column. So for now, let's just get the name of the employees. So it's going to go record by record in the result set, get all the employees, and print them out in this print line statement. And this catch clause, we could just leave as is, okay? Now, very important point. We can't just run this the way I have it here. If I run this, let's just hit play. Notice it's saying no suitable driver found for this particular, MySQL database. So remember that driver that we downloaded in the lecture before the previous one? That driver needs to now be inside of this project. So the way we're going to do that is I'm just going to right click this Learn JDBC project, right click and go to new and create a new folder, and I'll just call it lib. The folder name is going to be lib, and just hit finish. And in this lib folder, I'm going to bring in that driver that we downloaded from the MySQL database website. So let's head over to where I have that driver, It's in my home directory, mtazamod, and in this folder, this is the guy. Okay, so I'm just going to copy it, right click and go to copy, and I'm going to paste it inside of this lib folder. So right click and go to paste. And there we go, we've got that driver here. This is still not enough to run this. If I hit play, notice it's still not able to recognize that the driver is now part of this project. What we need to do is add this driver to the build path of this application. So what we do is right click this project and go to properties. I don't know if you could see that all the way to the bottom of the screen there, but properties, you click that, and then in the Java build path option in the libraries, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add jars. So click on this add jars button and then expand your project, which is a learn JDBC project. In the lib folder is where we have this jar, the JDBC driver for MySQL. So I'm going to click that, hit OK, and then apply and close. Click that button. And now this project should recognize this in the build path. Okay, so now if I hit play, it's working as expected. We're able to retrieve all of the employees from that database. Now this first line here is just sort of a warning. It's saying we need to establish an SSL connection. This is just a warning that's coming from the database, so you might see that, but ignore that for now. It's not important for the purposes of learning JDBC, but this is the data coming from the database. Now this is the name column. I can get the department as well. So let me print the department. I change the name to DEPT and then hit play, and now we get all of the different departments. If I want to get the salary, I could just change this to salary. Let's hit play. This is actually getting this salary in a string format. Okay, so if we were to assign this salary to an integer or whatever, we'd have to make sure that we cast it to the integer data type. Otherwise, we could just do, get. We have the Boolean data type, we have double, we have float, and then we have get int. So I can also get int like that. And then this will allow us to, whatever salary is, right, it would get that result in the int data type, so we won't have to cast to a string. So both of these options are available to you. You can hit play and notice it returns the same result. If I wanted to sum all of these salaries together, right, I would have to do the get int. So let's actually try that. I'm going to define a variable out here. I'm going to say int, and we'll call it salary total. And we'll initialize it with 0. And then inside of this while loop, I'm just going to keep incrementing salary total is equal to salary total plus. And then every iteration, it's going to add on to the next salary because we have the get int. And then now, after the while loop, I could print the salary total. So this is just an example of processing the data. So let's hit play, and there we go. We get the total number if we were to sum all of those salaries of the employees. Now, again, if I use instead of .getInt, if I do .getString, like that, we cannot sum it out of the box because this is actually returning a string version of this data. So to convert this string into an integer, what we'd have to do is use the integer wrapper class, integer.parseInt, and pass in that string. So that string is going to be the actual result that's coming from the database in the string format. And this will allow us to convert whatever's coming into an integer. Okay, so let's hit play, and that allows us to do the same kind of calculation. All right, so we are nearing the end of this lecture. You learned how to form a connection to the database using the connection object, and the parameter to that is the actual database URL. And I showed you how to compose that. You put, the JDBC : and then you give the kind of database it is. We were using MySQL. If you're using Oracle 11G database or the SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server database, you'd give that database name there. followed by the server and the port number to connect to, and then finally the database that you're trying to connect to. So there are slight differences in the way the URL string is composed depending on the database vendor, and it's very easy to look that up. You can always Google that information, but you learn how to compose the JDBC URL connection string for the MySQL database, and then using that connection object we were able to send a SQL statement to the database, and that was returning a result set. And then I showed you how you can process the results that you get from the database. So there's a couple more things to cover with regards to the JDBC API, and we're going to continue on that in the coming lectures. So let me wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lecture.